Hello, and thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast, created and recorded by Danielle Gurman, Naveed Iqbal, and Alexandra Johannesson. My name is Danielle Gurman, and you are listening to the Verb podcast for the Professional and Technical Editing Seminar at NJIT. In this podcast, I will focus on verbs. First, I will tell you about the types of verbs. Then I will discuss verb tense and using verbs. And finally, I will give you some examples of common verb errors. Throughout this podcast, I will be mentioning information gathered from 3 sources: the Chicago Manual of Style, published by the University of Chicago, and Technical Editing by Carolyn Rood and Angela Eaton are both a wealth of information on editing. So let's get started. What are verbs? Every sentence must have one if it is to be a sentence. In fact, it is one of the 2 requirements in order to make a sentence, the other being a subject. The Chicago Manual of Style defines verbs generally as the performance or occurrence of an action or the existence of a condition or a state of being, such as an emotion. There are many different types of verbs. Some of the common types are transitive, intransitive, regular, irregular, principal, and auxiliary. A transitive verb requires an object to express a complete thought, as in, the scientist creates the experiment. An intransitive verb does not require an object to express a complete thought, like in the sentence, you lie. Regular and irregular verbs are defined through conjugation. A verb is conjugated when it changes form to reflect mood, voice, tense, person, or number. A regular verb is conjugated by simply adding ed or d to the stem form to get the past tense or past participle. For example, conjugate becomes conjugated and is therefore a regular verb. Irregular verbs have a more complicated way of arriving at their past tense and past participle forms. Words like break become broke in the past tense and broken in the past participle. Similarly, drive changes to drove and driven. Principal verbs can stand alone to express an act or state, like he writes. Conversely, an auxiliary verb is used with a principal verb to form a verb phrase that indicates mood, tense, or voice. For example, in the sentence, I will go to the conference, will is the auxiliary verb and go is the principal verb. Taken together, will go is considered a verb phrase. Verb phrases contain an auxiliary verb that is used with a principal to indicate mood, tense, or voice, such as could happen, must go, or will be leaving. Another type of verb is called a linking verb. A linking verb, also known as a connective verb, links the subject to an equivalent word in the sentence, a predicate pronoun, predicate noun, or predicate adjective. There are 2 types of linking verbs, be verbs and intransitive verbs that are used in a weakened sense. The verb be has 8 forms: be, is, are, was, were, been, being, am. Many times you will hear this verb referred to as to be. To be is used as an auxiliary verb and generally means to exist. Remember that these 8 forms can also be conjugated. In the present indicative, be becomes am, is, are. In the present participle, be becomes being. For the past indicative, was and were are used, and for the past principal, been is the form. The second type of linking verb is an intransitive verb used in a weakened sense. The Chicago Manual of Style tells us that the weakened intransitive verb often has a figurative sense akin to that of became. Intransitive verbs are already considered weak because of their non-specificity. Linking types of intransitive verbs are even more so, as in the sentence, the river ran dry, because rivers do not run if they are dry. Other examples include verbs such as seem, smell, appear, feel, look. Now that you have a defined sense about what verbs are, let's take a look at what they do. Verbs have two types of voices. Voice shows whether the subject acts, called active voice, or is acted on, called passive voice. Rood and Eaton give some examples of each type of voice and why you might prefer one over the other. The sentence, "The board reached a decision," is active because the subject of the sentence, board, performs the action identified by the verb. There are some great reasons to prefer writing in the active voice. It adds energy to any document by conveying directly that people do things or that things happen. It also establishes responsibility by naming the person doing the action. For this reason, the active voice is preferable in many situations for ethical reasons. For example, in the sentence, "A decision was reached that you should be fired," the person or persons who reached the decision are obscured by the passive voice. The subject, decision, receives the action identified by the verb, was reached. The sentence is in passive voice because the subject is the passive object of the action or the recipient of the action. Rood and Eaton remind us not to confuse the passive voice with the past tense or weak verbs. Any sentence in the passive voice always has these components, a to-be verb and a past participle. One reason to write in this voice is to put emphasis on the recipient of the action rather than who does the action, because it doesn't matter who has done or will do something. The sentence, "Computer chips are made of silicon," is a prime example of this. Many readers expect the passive voice in certain publications, such as science writing, to convey a sense of the writer's objectivity. The facts, rather than the writer, predominate. However, the Chicago Manual of Style advises, as a matter of style, passive voice is typically, though not always, inferior to active voice. Certain genres require certain conventions of writing. Business and professional writing typically has a more rigid style. Therefore, it is important to research who you are writing for and what genre convention is necessary. The key to knowing which voice to use lies in understanding the style of the document. Does the document name the person doing the act, or is it important that the person not be named? Is it the sort of document that needs strong, active verbs instead of abstract verbs? Usually, active voice is preferable simply because it is easier to read. However, it is up to you, as editor, to know when to use it. Verbs do not only have a voice, they also have a mood. Mood indicates the manner in which the verb expresses an action or state of being. The three moods are indicative, imperative, and subjunctive. The indicative mood is the most commonly used in English. It is used to express facts and opinions and to ask questions, like, "Business cards cost very little," and "Does that website provide contact information?" The imperative mood expresses commands. "Have this done by tomorrow," directs requests, "Bring the tray in here," and sometimes permission, "Come in." The Chicago Manual of Style reminds us to use the imperative mood cautiously. In some contexts, it could be too blunt or unintentionally rude. As students of professional and technical communication, it is important that you remember this, especially when communicating with an international audience. Lastly, the subjunctive mood is not popular in American English. It is useful when you want to express an action or state not as a reality, but as a mental conception. Typically, the subjunctive expresses an action or state as doubtful, imagined, desired, conditional, hypothetical, or otherwise contrary to fact. Such expressions include, "If I were you," "Heaven help us," and "Be that as it may." Generally, people do not think about the mood in which they write. Most Americans naturally speak and write in the indicative mood and find the subjunctive mood too formal and stuffy. When writing and editing, use the mood that suits the document. Do not use imperative when asking for a donation, for instance, and keep it consistent. Consistency is key when dealing with verb tenses. Tense indicates the time in which an act, state, or condition occurs or occurred. The three divisions of time are present, past, and future. Each division also has a perfect tense that indicates a comparatively more remote time. The present tense is the infinitive verb's stem, also called the present indicative, and indicates acts, conditions, or states that occur in the present, as in walk or drink. The present tense similarly expresses a general truth, refers to timeless facts, and narrates a fictional work's plot. The past tense denotes an act, state, or condition that occurred or existed at some explicit or implicit point in the past, and is formed by inflection, such as walked or drank. The future tense is formed by using will with the verb stem form, and refers to an expected act, state, or condition, as in will walk, will drink. The present perfect tense is formed by using have or has with the principal verb's past participle. Have walked, has drunk. It describes an act, state, or condition that is now completed or continues up to the present, like I have put away the papers, or it has been a long day. The present perfect tense is different than the past tense because it indicates a more specific or a more remote time in the past. The past perfect tense also uses had with the principal verb's past participle. Had walked, had drunk. It refers to an act, state, or condition that was completed before another specified or implicit past time or past action, like in the sentences, by the time we finished the program, the malfunction had already interrupted data entry, and the seminar had ended early. The future perfect tense is formed by using will have with the verb's past participle. Will have walked or will have drunk, as in the sentence, the meeting will have finished by 5 o'clock. It denotes an act, state, or condition that is expected to be completed before some other future act or time. In addition to voice, mood, and tense, verbs have a person and number. A verb's person shows whether the act, state, or condition is that of this person speaking, as in I or we, the person spoken to, you, the person spoken of, he, she, it, or they. The Chicago Manual of Style tells us a verb's number must agree with the number of the noun or pronoun used with it, which is just another way of saying that it must be singular or plural according to the subject of the sentence. A verb must agree with its subject in person and number. For example, when a verb has two or more subjects connected by and, it agrees with them jointly and is plural. Socrates and Plato were wise. When it has two or more singular subjects connected by or nor, it is singular. Jill or Jan is prepared to speak. When the subject is a collective noun conveying the idea of unity or multitude, the verb is singular. The nation is powerful. And when the subject is a collective noun conveying the idea of plurality, the verb is plural. The administration were divided in their sentiments. Now that you know what verbs are and what they do, I'm going to give you two examples of common verb errors and how to avoid them. The first is called false attraction to the predicate nominative. The Chicago Manual of Style tells us that a plural predicate nominative after a singular subject may mislead a writer by suggesting a plural verb. For example, a common but grammatically incorrect sentence is, my downfall are computers. To correct this, you can change the number of the verb. My downfall is computers, although this may sound awkward to some ears. A better approach is to rework the sentence to, computers are my downfall. The second common verb error is misleading connectives, like as well as, along with, together with. It is important to remember that these connectives do not make the subject plural. An example of incorrect subject-verb agreement is, the scientist, as well as her funders, were prepared to discontinue the research. A grammatically better version of this sentence is, the scientist, as well as her funders, was prepared to discontinue the research. Although, to avoid the situation entirely, rework the sentence. The scientist and her funders were prepared to discontinue the research. Verb errors are common and can sometimes be picked up by the spelling and grammar check in your word processor. However, it is still important to be vigilant in using the right type of verb, voice, mood, and tense to perfect your skills as a good writer and editor.